Uh, I'm not sure if Miss Sims will be able to join us tonight, but we hope so. And welcome to week two of the role of the Black church in communities of crime, race, economic, and job disparity. So I am going to get right on it, but welcome, Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. So, James, it's going to be, if it's going to be just me and you, that's kind of like Ali Fraser. I mean,
uh, well, I guess I'm the pretty one here, so I have to be.
well,
uh,
yeah, it's good to join you. I really appreciate you. And I really like, the topics that we really have to keep these things out there. What people don't really realize is that you can tell somebody something, but you always have to remind them of it. My grandmother used to tell me stuff, and then I would go out and not do it. But what she would do is she was knock on my head like it's a door, like she's beating some sense into my house to tell me what she was saying. So, and I think we need to talk to each other and benefit from all of our experiences. So yeah, James, I appreciate being here. Your Steelers, I think they came back, so I was glad to see that. Vikings got by the skin of their teeth. Oh,
well, hey, luckily, it was a good week for both of us. I'm watching, of course, this Ravens game. As much as I would love for the Ravens to go down, I think our biggest worry right now might be Cincinnati. Everybody's talking about, the Ravens and the Browns.
yeah,
Going to, yeah, Cincinnati's what 4-1 now. I think they won yesterday
yeah,
too.
they're keeping up.
Yeah, so uh, the Ravens are what 2-2, and the Browns are 3-1, 4-1, something like that. But anyway, it's not that runaway at the top of like we thought it was going to be. That's for sure. You know, but when you talk about grandmothers and things like that, my grandmother. Was one of those that worked to take care of the family.
Now,
And
James, where was she from? James, where was your grandmother from?
my grandmother was from Meridian, Mississippi.
Boy, I had an aunt from Meridian. Wow,
Okay. Yeah,
wow.
my father's side of the family. I mean, my mother's side of the family was actually from Gadsden, Alabama.
Woo! That's by Birmingham, where my mom and them were from. Birmingham, Talladega, Gadsden, Sylacauga. I know
Yeah,
that area very well.
yeah, so
Bessemer. Yeah.
yeah, so so a lot of times she might not get to the physical building itself, but I think all of us remember, especially as young black men living in, if you went anywhere near grandma's house on Sunday morning, I remember hearing the Five Blind Boys. Uh,
Clara Ward singer.
they,
Clara Ward singer.
right, the sermon, the different sermon. Remember, sermons used to come on records then. You could get the sermon from the record store. The few famous ministers that was kind of like my auntie owned the record shop. It was a hair salon and a record shop together, a beauty shop. So we used to get hear the latest records and that from Fats Domino all the way up to the Staples. So but yes, on Sunday morning, when while she making them biscuits, you listening to the gospel, and she got the greens on the stove, and whatever. I mean, them smells, them smells and them sounds. So I don't really have to tell you
Oh
about
yeah, James, you bring me back to talking about like having the little businesses in our neighborhoods with the little barbershop, Mr. Crown.
it. Yeah,
Oh, Mr. Watson Crown, he had been a basketball player in North Carolina, and he owned the whole corner, a whole corner on 38th and 4th Avenue. And so, Mr. Crown, we were in there one day, and everybody was arguing about politics. That was the place that you really, as a kid, man, you
Yeah,
were in awe of these people, how smart they were and what they knew.
and
And what and so
and nobody on the block rented their house. Everybody owned their own home.
everybody on their own stuff. Everybody on their own stuff.
You
But
know,
they came into the barber shop and they was arguing, and Mr. Crown stopped cutting hair, which he would never do to get in the argument. He would just talk over you and still cut hair. This time, this time he stopped. He said, "Look, I'm not voting for the white man. I'm not voting for the black man. I'm voting for the right man." And he turned around and went back to cutting hair, and everybody else was like, "Woo!"
yeah. I mean, and things. Even though you went to church and I mean you knew what the candidate was about. I mean, church usually, even though they might not have done it publicly, once the doors were closed on Sunday, you kind of knew, where, what your church wanted you to do. My grandmother, my auntie, rather, she was a committee woman. So we always were in the midst of politics, and I will admit, that I believe in those days the only black Republican I knew was my uncle. I mean, it was just one of those things. Here's Mr. Bill Carroll. He's going to join us for a little while. Bill is one of the gentlemen that does my sports show, and but he also comes in and he's I know he doesn't look like much, Mr. Scott, but he's a very knowledgeable young man. I will put it like that.
My pleasure to be in this presence. My pleasure.
uh, former military officer, airborne trooper ranger like myself. So we kind of have a lot in common. But getting back to the role of the black church, Bill, we just kind of reminiscing here, talking about on Sunday morning and grandma and the if she didn't go to church, you heard the gospel songs playing through the house.
Right.
You might even have a sermon, or they might if you were in a bigger city, you might have a telecast in one of the churches. What was
James, with my grandmother, not to cut you off, but my grandmother, when she did what they call day work, okay, Birmingham, Alabama, she cleaned houses in the suburbs. She was a domestic, and she did tremendous work.
was
Tremendous. She
was
made
she?
more than my grandfather, and he worked at the University of Minnesota as a maintenance man. That's how good she was at it. But she sent me to college. They said I'm the oldest one. That's why she was going to do it. She sent me with all the money I needed for that semester. Of course, I didn't know what to do with. Next thing I knew, I was scrambling. But she also sent me something called a prayer cloth. She bought this prayer cloth from Reverend Ike
Oh,
Reverend Ike.
I
in New York. Okay. She bought this prayer cloth and she said, "You keep this in your wallet as long as you're in school." And I did it. But I'm
yeah.
saying that's how devout. I bring that up to say that that generation was so devout in their belief in what they thought they could imbue on us that would be good for us. They believed that. They didn't have many other opportunities but that. They couldn't go to schools, and if they were lucky, my grandfather wanted to go into the service. He wanted to go into service, but they wouldn't let him because he worked on the railroad, and they were laying things called ties. You know
Yeah.
what a tie is?
Yeah, I know exactly what a tie is. There's
A
big.
tie is a tree. Okay.
Now they make it's the wooden things that go in between the rails.
Going between the rails, and it's a
Yeah,
tree that's been
yeah,
cut, and that's what he carried up and down there for 20 years with the railroad. So, they came with a different focus. I don't know, James. I think they were devout. That was a devout generation.
Well, when it's funny you talk of Reverend Ike. When I ran away from home and I went to Newark, New Jersey, I stayed in a Father Divine hotel at
Oh my
16
God.
years old. And the reason why I stayed there is because they gave you free meals.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you know, Bill, go on. I know you're not quite, you might remember some of those names, but what do you recall in your childhood?
Yeah. Well, so the Reverend Clarence L. Freeman, who was the now the ex-husband, I guess, of a very close family friend, baptized me. He came from a long line of Freemans who were ministers. Like the family had been that had been their family business, or you want to call it, for probably 100 years. The if you, I mean, if you're really big into the history of the Black community of Norfolk, Virginia, you can find references to Reverend Freeman literally right after the end of the Civil War, when they were trying to reorganize the community, as people were being set free. And of course, the family name Freeman, like many Black families with that name, comes from them literally, leaving behind the name of their slave master and naming themselves Freeman, right? But there's been a Reverend Freeman. Now, actually, I guess the line has been broken. Now I think about it, because both of his children are doing something else. Chris Gerdine, he's taken his mother's maiden name after the divorce, is now working with the State Department. He's a retired Air Force colonel. And his sister, Mala Freeman Kwaku, is a pediatrician in the Northern Virginia area. So I guess when Reverend Dr. Freeman, if he has retired, he probably has, he's well into his 70s now. So now the line has been broken of 100 and something odd years of plus 100, probably 120-ish years. No, maybe more than that. Over 120 years. Going back to the, shortly after Civil War. But it's a very well-known, all that was to say, it's a very well-known line of preachers.
And I want to ask you a quick question about that.
Yeah.
With that history, how it started 100 years ago, where is it now? Or where has it kind of came to where it is now? One of the things I asked you this for is I do some music also, and I play at a church called Pilgrim Baptist with a choir with the Sounds of Blackness director.
Oh.
I grew up with them. I was one of their first bass players.
Oh. Okay.
But that church is like 150 years old. It's like
Right.
the oldest church in St. Paul that was organized by a group of supposedly, this is a story, freed slaves that took a raft from Missouri.
Oh.
And you got to really think about that. Raft is not
I am
no
thinking
boat,
about that,
okay?
because that's a tough way to go. It's
not
easier to go
you
down
don't
the
see no
Mississippi than up
sign.
the Mississippi.
You don't see no sign, rest area here. And
Right.
so they went and just stopped there. And it seems like what we did in those days when we stopped at a place, one of the first things we did was we started a church.
Yes, correct.
We started a church because that was going to bring us together. So they started that church, but I played there up until the last couple of years. And I noticed that there weren't many young people in the church. I noticed that it wasn't, the Sunday school was just not, and most of the people were really, I'm old. I'm 70. Okay, so now I have to admit it. Okay, James, it's on now. So, but most of the people were older. So I don't know where this goes. I didn't see many young people.
So two things. We ended up changing churches, but yes, no matter where you go, churches are aging. I mean, they're getting, not just the buildings, but the the average age of churchgoers has been going steadily up for over 40 years, black and white. That's one thing that black and white churches have in common. They're both getting old. So it's a combination of things. I think part of it is exposure to the larger world, for lack of whatever we're putting it, which was a gradual process greatly accelerated by things like the internet, right? The fact that you used to be, to see the quote unquote larger world, you had to get drafted or join the Navy or the Army or the whatever, or move away. But people moved away. So we talked about the passage of time. 200 years ago, most people didn't go 30 miles, away from the place of their birth. They lived and died within 30 miles of the place of their birth. Even 100 years later, still most people lived and died within 100 miles of the place of their birth. Now, over half of the people who will be born, in the 2000s will be less than half of them will live and die within 200 miles of the place of their birth, right? So we're a more mobile society than ever before. People pick up and go more than ever before. People are more exposed to things outside of their own community than ever before. And last but not least, the church didn't do a great job of adapting to the needs and wants of young people. I mean, it's not just younger people I can't put all the blame on people who are under the age of 40. The church didn't do a great job of realizing they needed to keep up, right? Now, some churches have done better jobs than others. There have been some churches that have done a great job of recruiting and retaining young people. And I should celebrate some of them. There's one downtown Chicago that
really
has
give me an address, because I really want to get in touch with that congregation.
I can do that. It's called the Cornerstone Church, and it's right off the Green Line train. I'm trying to remember the exact. I can look it up, but it's right downtown. You can see it from the train. They are very. Yeah, it's called the Cornerstone Church. Literally right down, middle of downtown Chicago.
Because we have one out here, and I'm wondering, I've heard the same term in Houston and in Dallas, and I'm wondering, I know it sounds kind of silly from when we were young.
Well, it doesn't sound as silly as you're.
No, what I'm saying.
Franchising. You're talking about franchising. Right. That is something that's not happening in church. In the church world,
franchising churches now.
It is it's not as new as you think it is, though. It's happening more now than ever before. So, say for instance, you are Joel Osteen, for example, right? Say for instance, Joel Osteen, and but he's not a billionaire, but he's well above millions, right? He's in the upper tens of millions of dollars in worth, and you have these young ministers who come to you in part because they want what you have. I mean, let's just be very clear and honest about it. The man owns a couple of jets, right? I mean, when you have jets, plural, not a jet, but jets, plural, there are going to be people who look at that and think, yeah, I'd like that. I'd like to have a full, basketball court in my backyard and an Olympic-sized swimming pool in my backyard like he has, right? And so that church and some other mega churches have begun franchising. So it's not as new as you think it is. It's just more prevalent now than ever before. And so what happens is these young ministers spend 3-4 years, being the B team, or however you want to put it, right? Filling in for him when he's on the road or when he wants to take a day off, preaching the less popular times, because they do 4 or 5 services a day, just so you know. It's like, they have shifts, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, right? Because they've got tens of thousands of people in there per shift, right? They probably preach to 60-something thousand people per Sunday in the location, and then millions, obviously, through television.
I get their church, mega church. They're making mega money.
Yes.
Mega things. What are they doing with it? Why do they have to have airplanes? Why do they have to have airplanes? Why do they have to have Benzes? Why do they have to have? What are they doing with the money when their parishes are taking their money from Social Security and pensions to put in their pot? What are they doing? That's
that
the
that
problem I have with it. With the
well,
mega church, it has no business having all. They need to live in the community. They just need to have a parsonage that can be paid for by the church, but it don't have to be no $1 million mansion. It needs to go right back to the
we're,
basics where we're helping
we're,
the flock, and that's what
we're,
religion is all about.
we're going to talk about that, the mega churches and that a little bit later. But I think one of the things that we kind of got away from is we have to remember in other generations, going to church was a family thing.
Yep.
When you got up in the morning, father, mother, kids, we're going to church.
Teaching me how to tie a tie, dad
Right,
showing me how
right,
to tie
right,
it in
right,
the mirror.
right, right. We're going to church today. Well, mom and dad might not be home in time for us to go to church. Dad might be in another house, and I don't. I mean, are you going to church, or are you running through a gauntlet? I mean, are you going to be shot at on the way to church? They're used to churches used to be called the house of sanctuary. Well, and we'll get into that a little bit later on too, because now, one of the things I guess the first question we might as well get into it right now is that uh, uh, talking about our sense of community, and I think that we have allowed our sense of community to be replaced by fear of our community. What suggestion would you have for taking back our communities using our own resources? In other words, not depending for somebody else to come in and help you, not begging the government, but I mean, what about the things that we used to have in the neighborhood? If Mr. Thompson and Mr. Walker walked down the street at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and said, "Son, how come you're not home?" You gave him an answer. You didn't get in his face and tell him, "Well, it's none of your damn business." So, Mr. Scott, I'm gonna go to you first. What what should we do with what we have in our own community?
Well, they have pretty much neutered our communities. I mean, they've taken our schools out. They've done everything they can to keep us powerless, and then to keep people in power that, as one of the great men would say, that's on a program that we're on, they don't know. They don't know. And so until we can really get to where we take a real stake in our community. And that's another thing, James, we've talked about. Do we really have those communities where I knew everybody in my neighborhood, where I walked to school with people, where we all knew and we knew, another thing that the man says they don't know. He says, well, what church you go to and all that. Well, that used to be important. That used to be from the standpoint of, if you went to that church, those churches always had communion with each other. I mean, I have been in. My mom played the piano at Bethesda Baptist Church and was the choir director for years here in Minneapolis. And I've been in every black church as a kid because she would go there and play, or they would have programs, or they'd come to our church. I mean, there was much more of a communal thing among black people that I see that we've let go. I mean, I think we have really not. One more thing I'll say about that is, when I got out of graduate school, I did an internship with the state of Minnesota. And so they actually had me running the office as an internship, as an intern. And so they said, you got to apply for the job. I applied for the job. My dad calls me up and said, yeah, my friend said he's going to be on the board when you apply for the job. He said, just don't say much. Just say, you really want the job bad and you'll get it. But these are the things we could do for each other. We don't have a foothold in this country anymore. We have allowed that to, I believe we allowed to get it go. Churches used to have much more clout. Every mayor and everything, they would have to come to the black churches and talk to the pastors. When Martin Luther King would come to cities, all the pastors would be there. It showed a solidarity, and that's what we don't have any solidarity right now. But that's an opinion.
Well,
And when I
well,
say, well, one thing, when I say an opinion, the great coach, Minnesota Vikings, Dennis Green, said the great thing about America is everybody can have an opinion. But what's even greater is you don't have to listen to it.
well, go ahead, Bill.
Also, formerly the head coach here, just a little north of here at Northwestern University.
Yes, Billy, my man.
But and tremendously underrated offensive mind in the history of.
Oh, come on.
People don't talk about
Woo!
Denny Green nearly
Robert
enough.
Smith, Randy Moss, Rejuvenate, Chris Carter.
Oh, a long list of players. I mean, he helped develop a bunch of players when he was with the 49ers that people don't give enough credit for. And
Roger
he did did a great job, obviously, in Minnesota. If not for, a missed kick, I think people think about him very differently.
Stop, please.
Sorry about that. It was painful for me too. I mean, trust me, we would, time for that's another show, but I could talk about my youthful.
What the thing I'll say about that?
All throughout my youth, many of my favorite players, including, I wore 88 actually because of Alan Page. Alan Page. And I wore
the junior high school I went to is now named after Alan Page.
Yeah, well, he should be on the Supreme Court, but that's once again for a whole other show. But you were talking about foothold, and some of that is literally a foothold. We unfortunately are now, for the first time in the history of, well, it's not just Black Americans, period. Homeownership is actually
gentlemen. I know that this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but
sure.
John Gruden.
He's been fired. Resigned. Yeah, he resigned like 40 minutes ago.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, he resigned 40 minutes ago. You guys clearly don't follow Adam Schefter.
I was actually looking at the football game, so it was on mute and I didn't hear it, but it came across as a note here on my phone.
Yeah, came across my phone right before I hopped on, but I figured you guys were not talking about that.
Well, so, yeah, we got to talk about Dennis Green and all that. And I just said, hey, you know me, Bill. Time is not one of the things that I really.
Right. Good point. Yeah, that's a good call there.
Well, see what that points out. His resignation points out how serious this racial stuff has gotten back to again. That points out, he makes a statement, he's got to resign. This shows you. Now that they're talking about Roe versus Wade, they're trying to turn back all these things we've already fought for. All these things with women, all these things with Black. We've already fought for this stuff, and we've already got it. And since the 45, which your great Don Allen, he's not gonna deny it, but since he was in there, they're really trying to ratchet it back up. They're really trying to position him to win. He's coming on TV now. He's coming out talking.
Well, and now instead of having one black guy in back of him, he has five. Go ahead.
And here's what I'm going to say. He's the culmination of stuff that really started going all the way back to Reagan. So for those who are big fans or students, whatever, political history, the fringe became the middle, right? Phyllis Schlafly and Jerry Falwell and all these people, they were the fringe, right? The Krautheimers and the Morton Kondrackis and the William F. Buckley used to look down their noses, their patrician noses at these people, right? It's like, we're kind of in the party with them, but we don't listen to them, right? And all those people that were the fringe, the tinfoil hat brigade, and however else you want to describe them, right? They went from being these people that they used to be like, shh, the adults are talking at the convention back in the 60s and early 70s and mid 70s. Lee Atwater, right? announced, for those who were listening, that the Republican Party was going to undergo an internal revolution, right? And he was quite prescient. He was quite prescient, and he wasn't the only one. I mean, others have been aware of it.
Yeah.
But Reagan was the first. What's it? The term that you mentioned, the camel's nose under the tent, the thin end of the wedge. With the election of Reagan and his beginning to embrace the quote unquote fringe, right? He, instead of holding them at arm's length, even Nixon had held them at arm's length, right? He was starting to bring them closer and closer. And by the time you get to the quote unquote Tea Party, right? Which originally was about small government and taxes. Remember those days? Remember those days when they were all about small government and taxes? Right? And then once they actually got their hands on the controls, they actually got invited into the club, they ditched all that stuff. You haven't heard them talk about cutting taxes. You haven't heard them talk about small government sits, right? They've been talking about everything else. They've been talking about calling people Kenyan and all this other stuff they've been doing since then.
Just kind of getting back to the point here, because you mentioned Kenyan, and I have to once again go back to what happened earlier, that a lot of people kind of, I guess, I don't know whether we thought it was progress, whether it was because we were comfortable with these people, but to me, this is kind of, when you talk about the Tea Party. When the Tea Party first started out, Al Sharpton was fat.
Yes, correct.
And Jesse Jackson was, making a new word every 2 weeks. So we kept seeing the same people. I remember, and I remember when Jesse Jackson just first kind of appeared on the scene, and you had all the old folks talking about this is the younger generation and how much progress we're going to make, and how these people are more or less like Moses going to lead us to the promised land. And as I've always mentioned on this show and every other show, I see the same faces, but I don't see that much progress when I look down at my feet. You can tell me that I ran a mile or two, but when I look down on it, I've only made 75 yards of progress. But then, maybe I'm the guy with the glass half full. But, like I said, kind of getting back to the role of the Black church, have we been, like Malcolm said, Mr. Scott, have we been bamboozled, led astray? I mean, because no one seems to have filled in the vacuum of these old people. I mean, these people are our age. Jesse Jackson's getting ready to turn 80.
Yep.
I mean, you can't plan your future with someone that has 1 foot in the grave.
Well, that's why they have to nurture people to come up. And that's what hasn't happened. Nobody's really looked at picking up that type of mantle that they did. And that's because you have to have some people that come in and see a Martin Luther King. You see all the people we have people in Minneapolis. Mr. Harry Davis was a great director of Golden Gloves. They had the kids. We have one of the best Golden Gloves boxing things in the country.
Yes,
right here in Minneapolis with Harry Davis. And so Harry Davis had got the city council. He ran for mayor, but he didn't make it. He got so high. But we had, in most of the cities I grew up in, and I grew up here in Minneapolis, but traveled a lot to Detroit, where my grandfather lived, who had been in the service, was a sergeant over in Pacific somewhere, and was a supervisor at Chrysler. Matter of fact, when I went to Chrysler, he gives me his new Chrysler when I went to college. was a different time. We don't have. Gosh, I don't know what we've lost because the church played such an important part. I know in almost everybody that I knew, even if you didn't go, they still supported you. If they had family members that weren't church, they didn't let those people go. We all stuck with each other, and as that glue has fallen apart, I when I see churches now, they're really just trying to survive. Most of them I see are really just trying to survive. Most of the parishioners of the black churches here in Minneapolis, they live out in the suburban area,
Right.
and they come back into Minneapolis just for church mainly, or if they have relatives, or so it's just a whole different dynamic, and I don't know where we go from there. There's really no direction that I see. I
Yeah,
really don't. I really don't. It's just like every person for themselves kind of a thing.
Bill, has the church went from airborne to air mobile, or has it went leg?
Well, I'll take it a step further than that. I would say it's on reserves is what's happened.
Okay.
We it, obviously in the days of King and C.T. Vivian and I mean that great generation, they were in the front, not just the front line of things that were related to the church. They were in the front lines of everything that related to the black community. If something happened with a bunch of black carpenters not being able to get their union cards, the church was involved. If right, I mean, name something, right? If it was anything, something that happened at a hospital, whatever it was, Little League baseball, there was nothing in which the church did not involve itself. And we've now reached a point where the church, for whether it be intentional or not, does church stuff, right? I mean, and sometimes doesn't even do that all that well in some places. I mean, as you said, some of them have gone into basically survival mode. They're trying to hold on to what they have and have stopped thinking about growth and stopped thinking about outreach and stopped thinking about how can we have an impact on the lives of people who aren't even part of our, of our flock, right? They're busy trying to hold on. It's like, hey, can you bring your grandchildren? I mean, they're having all these things where it's like, hey, can you bring? Invite a friend, invite an enemy. We don't care. The part of it is, I don't want to say luck, but there was this great group of dynamic young ministers who were all within a few years of each other, right? A few years of age with each other, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, covered almost all of them. Almost all of them were born sometime between the mid-1920s and early 1930s. And just as the civil rights movement was happening, they were all leaving divinity school. I mean, it was, I don't know, destiny, pick a term, whatever term you want to use. Amazingly, important timing. It all came together. And as they either literally died, in the case of some of them, or just decided to pull back, the people who were watching them, who were behind them, the younger ministers, either said, oh, that person died doing that. I would like to not die. Or they saw them pull back and said, oh, well, if they're not going to do that kind of stuff anymore, then I guess I shouldn't do that kind of stuff. There was a time when the church led from the front, James, right? I mean, the church led from the front. In all these different things that we talked about, the church led from the front. The church was right in there. If we were getting our heads kicked in, your local minister was getting his head kicked in, right? When's the last time you saw your local minister get his head kicked in, James? It's been a long time since I've seen a minister get his head kicked in by the police or the National Guard or anybody, unless he's getting robbed or she's getting robbed. So that's part of it. That amazing generation, and they were an amazing generation, that did all those things, accomplished all those things. Well, they're all gone now, literally, physically gone. And then their impact, the echo is getting quieter and quieter and quieter. The people that followed behind them, And I'm not trying to put them down or impugn them, but they saw what happened. They saw, well, oh, he's dead. Well, I'm not doing that. Or, like I said, well, he's not dead, but he's not saying all that stuff. He's not doing all that stuff anymore. He's not leading from the front anymore. So maybe that's what we do now. Maybe we don't do that anymore. It's difficult to follow somebody if that person stops leading, right? How do you follow someone who stopped leading?
Mr. Scott, you have a book, the Scott Collection.
Yeah.
And you, in that book, it kind of traces the history of Black people in your particular city, in your particular area. I'm just curious. What would you think would be the percentage of the people in your book that had some type of church background or were leaders within the church and the Black community?
I'd say 50%. I really, at that time, I really would. And in my dad's early books in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the church was a huge part of all three of those books. And what he did was he highlighted every community, education, schools. And when you go back and you look at the community and how many people worked at schools like Central High School, North High School, where it was predominantly Black, and the staff was predominantly Black, and they lived in the neighborhood. Well, the maintenance guys lived across the street from the school, so they could keep an eye on it. They could really, and so the church has been in a way, to me, it's a dichotomy. Because when I went to college, one of the big things I was looking forward to was I didn't have to go to church every Sunday now. I didn't have to go take my grandmother in the prayer meeting on Wednesday or the choir rehearsal on Thursday. That's the only time they would let me use the car. I got a beat. Grandpa, let me use the new Chevy. Oh, yeah, okay. When Saturday comes, oh, I'm busy. Oh, no, you can't use tonight. So that was going to college was like a freedom thing for me in the education. But then when I really began to look at that, I began to realize that my parents, my grandparents, that's all they had. That was their hope. That was their hope. They didn't have opportunity in Talladega, Alabama. They didn't have opportunity in Birmingham. That's why they came north. That's why so many other relatives went to Chicago, went to Detroit, because they knew they were never going to get anywhere down there at that time. They were not going to get in the unions. They were not going to. My grandfather worked on the railroad down south, Birmingham. He said when they were at the train thing, he could drive the engine, and he wanted to be an engineer. They would ask him to move the train around to different spots so that they could work on them or do. So he knew how to do it. They said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. They lived with my mother telling us she goes to the movie in Birmingham. They got to sit upstairs. It's nasty. They got to drink out of water fountain. Don't work. They got to go to a bathroom and it's nasty. And me and my brother are like, we're ready to just go beat up every white person we see. Why you treating our mother like that? But she just said, they don't know. Like what the man said, they don't know. Like, that's where she was. She said they don't have any idea. She said she went to Parker High School, which was the biggest Black high school in the country with the number of Black people at that school in Birmingham. One of her rivals, Willie Mays, he went to Fairfield. She said, I saw Willie all the time. He came, played basketball, baseball. I'd go to all the games. So she knew that we could do whatever we want to do. She had no, and that's the kind of feeling we have to get back. I really believe we have to feel what we watch on TV, what we read in the paper, they're going to feed us they're going to continue to feed us the pablum.
I don't know. Bill sounds a lot like Phoenix City, Alabama to me.
I've heard of that. I've heard of that place.
I'm pretty, Bill. I'm pretty sure. Well,
Well, by the
did
time
you,
by the time I
did you
came along,
ever
Phoenix City had
grade?
lost some of its original repute, I guess
You
is
mean
the term I would use.
you mean
But
luster?
the
The luster.
stories still
The
remain. Yeah.
luster. The luster of Phoenix City after dark. Talking about
Yeah.
cribbing after dark. Yeah,
Yes. Right.
sun. Sun. You get caught on. I don't care whether you was in uniform, had your boots bloused. You could still decorate a tree in Phoenix. It was,
Isn't that something? Isn't that something? Yeah.
Right. Right.
and I'm talking about 1967.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Isn't that
but,
something?
but go ahead, Bill.
Yeah.
I think you came along what about 20 years later, 15 years
Yeah.
later.
So by the late 1980s, it had lost some of its a little zip off its fastball. The stories were still being handed around, but it wasn't anything like it used to be.
But
The
like I said, I mean, but you could tell within the black community in Phoenix City that it was its own community. There you had to have your own churches. I mean, you had to have your own community because, like I said, after dark, might have a little trouble in Phoenix City. If you were on the wrong persuasion.
Well, and
Yeah.
these things are not that far away. You know,
No,
I
no,
used
no. And
to
Bill
ask
lives in
my
Chicago.
I
Yeah.
used to ask my grandfather, television. I said, why did all the early blues guys just play acoustic guitar? Why? He said, we didn't have no electricity down there. We didn't have no bathrooms. We had a well. That's where we got our
Yes,
water
yeah.
from, you know. And so you begin to really say, and then I talked to another one of my uncles down there. He lived in Greenville, Mississippi. He
I know that.
said, he said, I had a cousin. We had a cousin live 5 miles away. He said, I would never see him unless I had a mule or we could get a mule or something to ride over. He said, we would never see them. And they only live about 5, 6 miles away. There
Or
were no buses, there wasn't no, and nobody had a car. He said
no,
nobody had a car at that time down there. You had to have a mule or, So
or but on Sunday morning, they either walked to church, took that
Yep.
mule, or whatever they had to do to get to church.
they get
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it opens my eyes to these things. History is, we live it, and we need to really. I don't want to say, well, however you want to deal with it, it's up to the individual. But I think we want to learn from it.
You
We
can
want to
say
use it as our strength.
you can say
We want
whatever
to
you
use that
want
as
on.
the strength that we have to move ahead.
You can say whatever you want on my program, Mr. Scott. I am rated MA, so because there are times when I have things to say. So, but getting back, uh, Bill, I did a series. I think it was last year, and I did that series on using hope as a weapon. And I think this kind of goes along with what's happening with the church. Um, we weaponize hope, telling the young people that there's still that pie in the sky, and you can if you do good works here on earth, you'll be rewarded in heaven. But strangely enough, about 8 o'clock in the morning, I want breakfast. About maybe when we get off the show, I'll want supper. And that's not going. My stomach's not going to wait to the hereafter in order for me to be full. My point being is we have to, as a community and as the black church, we have to stop putting so much emphasis on the afterlife when we have to live now, and we have to get
Well,
we have to we right now we are being assaulted on all sides.
sure. And some of that's a residue of how the black community was Christianized in, the US. I mean, the whole point, or the a major part of the whole point, was to make being a slave something you could stand, right? And
Paladin.
so when they began Christianizing slaves, it wasn't to save their souls. It wasn't some act of mercy. It was to say, hey, if you put up with this here and now, things will get so much better for you when you die. Please don't revolt and kill us all in our sleep. So you must remember that many people are not familiar with it. Some people are, and some people aren't. The term Ladino, right, which gave later birth to the term Latino, literally meant Christianized African, right, in Spanish, right? So the Bozales, the saltwater Africans, were not Christianized, right? So they didn't have, in Spain, they didn't have the right to sue or get married or whatever. But the Ladinos, Ladino, which later became Latinos, right, were Christianized. They had Christian names. They had accepted, the Catholic Church. And though they weren't citizens of Spain or New Spain, they had at least some rights. They could get married. They could hold certain positions. They've always dangled some sort of carrot, even if that carrot was not a carrot you could eat in this life, right? Based on you accepting Christianity. And the version of Christianity that was sold to the slaves, that was given to the slaves, was one that put all its emphasis on the afterlife, because they had to. If they had talked about the life you were living here and now, where you literally could be sold like a piece of furniture, it would not have gone over well, right? They had to point to, the big rock candy mountain, right? They had to put everything on the afterlife, because you were a slave. If you started thinking while you're sitting there in church about the fact that, you own nothing and you are owned, right? You're not going to get the same joy that you're going to get out of it, right? The whole thing was to get you to put all of your focus while you were in worship on the sweet by and by, right? If you think about the here and now, you're going to be an angry, angry person.
Well, I guess that
Uh,
explains my. I
I
guess that explains my. My existence on Earth for the last 74 years. But go ahead, Mr. Scott.
well, no, I just wanted to say that religion itself, to me, having been raised in, my mom, I mean, from my earliest days, that's how I knew that church more than I knew school. But there's a dichotomy between what is religion and what is spirituality. Okay.
Yes.
And see, this is the thing that I think that people don't really. There is some type of spirit. There's some type of a force or something that brought our people through all the things we've been through. My grandmother told me all the stuff she used to going to church. We had barefoot on a dirt floor. We would just have church wherever we could do it, but we always had it. And she was always in the choir, always singing. And if you listen to people like Dr. Henry Clark, who tells you things that there was religion and spirituality before there was Christianity, before there was these different politicalized religions to control people in different areas. So, I mean, it's really a fascinating thing for me that I've studied. I've listened to the great Muhammad Ali is one of my heroes. And when they asked him, they said, "Well, why are you a Muslim? Why are you a Muslim?" He said, "Well, I think Jesus is right. I think Muhammad is right. I think Buddha was right. But this is what works for me. When I go to different countries, Islamic countries, I don't have to eat and I don't have to go to the back door. I don't have to go to, I don't have to drink out of a certain fountain. Where he grew up in Louisville and saw that coming up. So religion and spirituality to me, am I a religious person? Well, I am looking for a church to go to. Usually I play music at a church, and with pandemic, trying to find another place to play and go. But religion, spirituality is what I think is the real deal for me.
Well,
And what
I
the differences are, and I I guess I'd have to ask you gentlemen, is there a difference? That's
well,
how I view it.
there's as a PK preacher's kid, I lost religion at the age of probably about 12 or 13. I found spirituality uh, in Huey City at 045 on the 31st of January, 1968. And I've been very spiritual ever since. Um, haven't been very religious, but I I do have in my background, there I do have some experience that have certainly made me spiritual. Bill, you might have some of those uh, religious moments or
Well,
spiritual moments
sure.
during your career also.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of both, and yeah, I mean the thing about religion is that religion is a hierarchy, right? It is a structural um, creation to administer, right? To administer faith, right? It is not a direct connection. It is not a direct relationship. The point of having religion is to administer faith, is to figure out how best to direct certain things, right? So that's why you need to have bishops and archbishops and all these different powers and principalities and all these different ranks and all these different positions, is because if people were left to their own devices, they would find a way to have a relationship with God, but it might not be the way that they would want you to have a relationship with God. So religion is man-made, obviously, and it is not to say it's always bad, because religions have done good things as much as they've done bad things, but they are indirect, right? They're built up around and related to, but not of, spirituality, because spirituality is direct. It is immediate. It doesn't need intermediaries. It doesn't need direction. It doesn't need prescriptions. It doesn't
It,
need religion
I,
does.
it's
I
based
I
on
don't.
fear. It's
I,
based on fear. It's based
yeah,
on fear. It's based on the fear that, well, I went to a sermon. I wanted to see this guy on Easter. And I mean, he just gave a tremendous thing on doubting Thomas. He just gave a thing where he said, "What the disciples said, Thomas, he's dead." Thomas said, "I know he's dead. I saw it. I saw him stick the thing in his side. I saw him put the crown on his head. He was dead." The disciples said, "No, we saw it." And so Thomas, he didn't know what to do. But this is where they put us, in the fear. You're going to go to hell. You're going to go to hell if we don't do what we tell you to do.
I've
You're going
been
to
there
burn in
already.
hell forever.
Been
Fire
there
7 times
already.
hotter.
You can't threaten me with that. I've been there. So you got to come a little better than that. But that's just my experience. You know, you know, you know, you know. Hey, but Bill, I just don't understand. And this goes to whether it's the vaccine, whether it's our voting block, or whatever. Uh, First of all, the disunity, um, as far as um, things of what I call common sense. Okay,
Mhm.
I mean, before you enroll your child in school,
Yep.
you have to do certain things before, I mean, even as a minister, someone that you're supposed to be the guardian of your flock. Uh, the basic concept. You're the shepherd, they're the sheep.
Right.
And it seems to me that I find in the black church that instead of administering to the flock, we spend a lot of time shearing the flock.
Right.
But like I said, maybe this is just me with the glass half empty again.
Well, there was an earlier question where we're digging down into the roots and the trunk and the fruit of the mega churches and some of the things that have grown out of the mega church movement, right? So, and I'm not going to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes on why people do or don't believe in prosperity gospel and all that good stuff, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this. America finds its way into things that are considered sort of, I don't want to say untouchable, but when people talk about the quote unquote melting pot and all sort of stuff, this nation has a tendency to want to worm its way into some of everything, right? And it's a culture of acquisition, and it's a culture of competition, and it's a culture of exalting despite the fact that we often talk about unity, we constantly exalt the few over the many in this country. Like, we do not believe in collectivity. Even though we do it all the time, we don't praise it, right? We're always praising, well, General Washington did such and such. Well, General Washington did some stuff, but let's talk about his staff. What did Nathaniel Greene do? There's all these people that contribute to all these things, and we always focus on the single, usually the single white dude, but the single whoever that is somehow accomplished this amazing thing, right? There's a reason that when we tell these stories of Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Wild Bill Hickok, and even people who are full-on psychopaths, right? Like Jesse James. We focus on this single person, even though almost everybody I just discussed was part of something larger, part of a group, part of a gang, part of an army, part of a movement, part of whatever. But we focus on the one, right? We focus on the one. So anything that involves thinking systematically about what everyone is doing, right? How often do people talk about Bayard Rustin's role in the March on Washington, right? I mean, people below a certain age don't even know who Bayard Rustin was.
That was going to be my next question. It's like, how many people do you think really know who he is? So
well, that's my point, right? I mean, and I'm not here to denigrate Martin Luther King, but if people think that he did it, you don't understand how anything works, right? He didn't do any of that stuff. He was the titular or the face or the voice or the whatever, and he was an amazing orator. But there were all these women whose names we'll never know, who made the phone calls, who raised the money, who auctioned off boxed lunches and whatever else so that they could do all the stuff that they did. Because movements are expensive. For those who've never had to try to have a movement before, right? Movements cost money. And so he didn't do all that, right? But we always focus on the one. The reason that this nation is what it is and the way it is, and a whole bunch of other things I could say, at least in part, is because of this constant obsession with this one lone, exceptional, heroic whoever, right? The icon, the iconoclast, the one who zigs when everyone else zags, right? And that's usually BS. I mean, almost everything that's ever been accomplished of any note involved a whole collective getting it done. So when we talk about the church, there was a myth that grew up within the Black church that it was these, I mean, and once again, I'm a huge fan of C.T. Vivian. I'm a huge fan of King and lots of others, but it was all these people whose names we'll never know that allowed this to work. And once those people that had held them up, right, all of that foundation started to, one, just literally die off due to age, but also get disenchanted, right? Because you talked about progress. And though some progress certainly was made, I think people imagined we'd be much farther along than we would be around these issues, right? And as you made note of, as you just basically, said in your little preamble, while things certainly could be far, far worse, things should be far, far better than they are. And people can only endure certain things for so long. So to wrap up, and I spent more time as I meant, for the church to get reinvigorated, the community must, one, truly believe the church has the community's interest at heart, right? I mean, it's difficult to get people excited about investing time, money, and energy in something that they're not sure is going to benefit them. And that wouldn't have been a question 50 or 60 years ago, but it's very much a question in the minds of people now.
Mr. Scott, talking about these mega churches. I mean, it and you mentioned the prayer cloth that you took to college with you. Well, I got cable. I think there's at least 3 stations I can go on right now where, if they're not trying to sell me a prayer cloth, let's see. I think there's some prayer oil here. There's another one. If I buy this, it guarantees that I'll have wealth abundantly by the end of the year. There's another one here that. See what are they trying to do? No, they just want you to buy some inspirational works from this particular minister. So, it seems that and as I was saying, talking about church franchises and things like that, I mean, how much faith am I supposed to have in a church that is basically a religious Taco Bell?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, James, that's a good question, because it's become a business. It's really become just a business. And, and if they would do their business model like, the country won't do a business model like where they mix people together, where they mix black, white together. They say that they want to do that, but they don't want to. They want to move out of our areas. They want to. I mean, there's no reason that these churches, let's have white members, let's have black members. Do we need to have just a black church anymore? I don't know. I mean, I really begin to really think about that. I really think about how, I think about it because back in the 60s or whatever, I was watching a program that had nothing but shows from the 60s. And it had Ed Sullivan, the old Ed Sullivan show, I'm sure. But this one, it was so cool because they had the Count Basie Orchestra backing up Tony Bennett. I mean, come on. You know what I mean? This is a meeting of everybody's going to love that. The white people love it. The black people, you know what I mean? He had Count Basie back there, and this segregation thing has been the bane of this country, just like it had been in South Africa. This whole apartheid, this is not the way people are supposed to be meant to live. And so I've always believed religion played a part, but I mean, and then the church I went to, Bethesda Baptist Church, was black, but they had a white Jewish lady that ran the money. She was married to a Mexican guy. I mean, there were white people at the church. I mean, it's I think that this is where we all fall down. This is where we all fall down on this race fallacy. It doesn't exist, and it's something that continues to keep a divide. It even comes down to where we're talking about defunding the police. It's all here in Minneapolis. This is a huge, huge thing. If they do this, they have no plan for what's going to be the next step. They don't know what's going to happen with police. Police are going to quit, take their retirement, get on out of there. I believe it needs to be reformed. There's no question about it. They need to change their structure. You can't have the union running your police.
I definitely agree with that, and we're going through somewhat of the same thing out here in San Diego, but we do have a better plan, probably than what I've heard so far in your area. But I definitely am one that is for defunding the police. But that's when I say defunding, that also means reform. That boxing program that you were talking about, that was so famous in your area, your state. I'd like to see that revised.
Yeah.
And I mean, and then getting back to these mega churches. Most churches, whether they're mega churches or little churches, have a tax exemption. And I believe that these mega churches should be required to donate a certain part of that money to the community. Bring back those community services, bring back those community programs. If you can get your reverend, $100,000 car or a $2 million home, I'm sure that you could give $100,000 to something that will benefit the neighborhood.
After school program, an after school program.
There are many ways. There are many
Saturday
ways
GED, Saturday GED
that we could use that money. Like I said, there are ways that you can use that money effectively to get the youth off the street, and the youth are not as enamored with. And I might be wrong, but this is just an observation. I don't think that they're as much enamored with the life hereafter as they are with what's going on in their particular lives today.
Yeah.
Bill, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple of things to say to this. I think there is a tendency to think about the church itself as this thing that I go to make my grandmother happy, however many times a year it takes to satisfy her or whatever. That's one thing. Two, I think there is an increasing number of young people who, while they believe in God, they have little to no faith in organized religion. And the third part of this, the third leg of it, is, as we sort of hammered away at, is that the church has pulled back within its own shell, right? It's serving the saved, right? I mean, like no offense, but Jesus didn't spend his time speaking to the saved. Jesus went out to find the whores and whoremongers and thieves and, cutthroats and whatever. It's like, I mean, that's it. You're not, if you're almost literally preaching to the choir, right? As the other, I mean, we reach to the point where the church is almost literally preaching to the choir. Like, when's the last time you saw someone you didn't recognize when you stepped into your pulpit, pastor? And if that's not changing, if it's always the same people, then you need to get up and go. You go out. right? You go stand on a street corner, you go to a soup kitchen, you go to an unemployment office, you go to whatever it is and say, I'm here to help, right? And then later you get to preach the gospel. You earn that, right? I mean, the fact is that a culture has grown up around our ministers, and we still look to them to some extent as leaders, even though some of them, frankly, aren't. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Not everyone who's called to preach is called to lead. First of all, I mean, I don't expect every single one of them to be a person who's just a natural leader, or even a person who wants to be a community leader. But, however, if the church is to regain its previous prominence, some of them will have to step into a leadership role. You can't all just do your jobs and go home, right? You're not just punching a clock. The point of being called, I thought, was that it's more than just a job.
I published a cartoon where it had all of these sheep in church, and one of them pulled the hat. It was a hat off, and he said, "We're the sinners," because, as Bill said, we are now all preaching to the choir. Mr. Scott, have you seen a new face in any church that you've been to? I guess other than yours, since since you said you're kind of searching, but I mean, do you still see the same familiar faces at 80 years? I mean, 70 years old. Do you see the younger generation? Or is it like Bill, where grandma wants you to take her to church on Easter, and maybe you go on the midnight service, at the end of the year. I mean, is that kind of becoming standardized in your
Well, I
part of
don't
the
know.
country also?
I don't know. I continue to bring myself back to the credentials of these leaders that are in these different churches or parishes or whatever they're called. I mean, I see people that call themselves a bishop. I don't know how they became a bishop. I mean, I don't know if were they. I mean, was there a ceremony? Was there education? I hear many bishops or apostles, first ladies, but I have to really wonder what the credentials of some of these people. And then I see a lot of reverend doctors. I don't know where these titles come from. I mean, not that I'm denigrating them in any way. It's just that, I mean, how did you become a bishop? Do I have the right to ask that? Do you have the right, or as a person that attends the services, to know if the person what their background is, what their, I mean, then we start getting into different territory. I mean, usually coming up, preachers have just been a charismatic guy. And in a lot of the churches I came up with, with my mom and grandmother and some of the ladies, there was some shenanigans going on. I'm just going to say it. There was some shenanigans between the choir ladies, even a lawsuit, as I recall, happened between one of them. So I'm always curious about how a person, they say they were called. Okay, you were called. I mean, so what does that exactly mean? I don't know. Does that mean that you've read the Bible from front to back? Does that mean that that's what your preaching is based on, the Bible? What does that mean? So some of the credential things is
Some cases it means that there was a wrong number. That's what it means. But that's a different conversation altogether. But but like I said, being a preacher's kid, I know in a whole lot of cases it was a wrong number. It was like, I think, I'm kind of with you. Like, how do you develop this hierarchy. I mean, Bill, it's not like you're in the army where you have to take a test. I mean, does time and grade, is that what's uh, the standard for, like, after 10 years I'm a doctor, after 20, 25 years I become a bishop, and I guess after that, I become a pro. I mean, I don't know the hierarchy, like I said, but I'm kind of like with Mr. Scott here. What the hell makes you a bishop? I mean, I got a bishop on my chessboard. I mean, but so
Right.
bishop. To me that also, when you talk about slavery and things like that, this is another term to me where it was something that gave you that sense of authority, kind of like, well, being a house nigga. Just hey, this is my show. They don't like it, put me off. But I
But
mean,
think about it, James. Think about it. You're on a plantation working, and the preacher is the slave master.
well, hey,
That's the preacher
you
that's telling you what's going to happen, and then your bishop and your is your right hand man that's saying amen, amen. So I mean, this it's historical. I mean, it's something that people really, I think, really need to educate themselves about. I mean, I really think that there's some rhyme or reason to this universe. I mean, when I see the birds fly in the sky, when I see the sun come up every day, when I see the seasons change, there's a rhyme or reason to this thing. And I don't know it is what they're telling me it is, but I mean, I think it's still something that I have the right and I have the interest in seeking out.
Bill, what do you think about that? When rhyme or reason, uh, we've kind of been in situations where rhyme and reason have been thrown out the window. Uh,
Right.
you know, uh, uh, you know, uh, we've certainly been in situations where days were not promised that day or the next, and
the
uh, you
next
know,
the next few minutes might not be
right.
promised. Yes.
I understand what Mr. Scott is saying, but experiences has taught me that these situations come a lot quicker than people really think. You talk about the pie in the sky and things like that, but as I said, you also have to concentrate on your everyday living and letting. I
Mr.
think I think your life should be a beacon to those around you.
Well,
You
Mr.
should
King,
you shouldn't have to preach
Mr.
to someone
King,
about who you are. People should know who you are by your deeds and by your works.
well,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr. Scott.
King, Mr. King, I tell you, I have really, when I lose the most girl of my dreams after 40 some years, it's a thing that tells me, watch you go through this cancer and watch that this life really becomes about dealing with things that you didn't think would happen when they do happen. I mean, it really comes down to we just don't know the day, we don't know the hour, and that's why some of the things. See, when I read the Bible, what I say about the Bible is this is something that has been written by people that have lived before me. These are people that have taken their life. They didn't have no computers, they didn't have no pencils or papers, but they took the time out of their life to tell us how they lived and what things you're going to go through in life. And so, whatever you think about the Bible, or about religion or whatever, to me, it's a book that tells me of people that have lived this life before. They've seen it all. They've seen it all. And they put it in there. And all the things we see now, we faced this before. But unless we really look and see back, we're going to face it just like we never been there before.
Right.
So that gives us, to me, it gives me a leg up. It's something, and I think it's one of the greatest books that's ever been done. And I don't know how true some of them are. I don't know how they've been plagiarized over the years, but I think somehow that there really is a God, and somehow a message gets through. And that's for every individual to feel how they feel about that.
Well,
It's an opinion. It's just an opinion.
I know, Bill. I know I kept you a little longer than you intended, but uh, you want to give us your final thoughts for the evening, man, and thank you so much for joining us here on this Monday evening.
Sure. Well, since you did uh, bring John Gruden into this, I do want to talk about the culture of certain kind of leadership, right? And someone made reference to 45 earlier as well. We've come to all too often accept and sometimes even expect certain kinds of people to fall upward into leadership, whether they are truly prepared for it or deserve it or not. And the whole cult of John Gruden revolves around two things. One, the whole Chucky persona, and then two, the fact that the Oakland Raiders were so incredibly either dense, arrogant, or both that they never changed their checks and their audibles prior to the season, where their head coach, who had been John Gruden, who had installed the system, leaves, goes to another team, and then they're about to face that team in the Super Bowl. And I would think, even if you had only coached, say, up to like 9-year-olds, you would say, hey, everything we're doing is kind of something that's incredibly familiar to the guy that's going to be coaching against us. Maybe we should make some changes. For whatever reason, Coach Callahan said, nah, we're fine. And of course, all throughout the preparation, John Gruden, and I'll give him credit for this, took over being the scout team quarterback, right? Got to live his little NFL dream, I guess, to some extent, and basically showed them everything that Rich Gannon likes to do. Threw all the routes, Rich Gannon's favorite routes, his favorite adjustments, what he likes to, the hots he likes to throw on, when there's blitzes coming, all that. Showed them everything. Gave them the keys to the kingdom. And they won the Super Bowl. Now, mostly that was a team that was built prior to him getting there, right? A team that Rich McKay and Tony Dungy had built before he got there. A team that was ready to win the Super Bowl. He got to take over a ready-made team. He's never been that good a coach before or after that. But there's Colt, the Chucky thing, and then the Super Bowl built up around him and gave him all these opportunities. For whatever reason, Mark Davis was, I don't know, seduced. I don't know what term to use. Gave him this amazing contract, this crazy, crazy contract. And I don't know the ins and outs of the legalities in it. Maybe they were able to get out from under it because of him violating some sort of morals clause, or maybe it's because he resigned. They don't have to pay all that money. But this is a man, right? I mean, I'm not elevating him above that, but there are people who manage to talk themselves into looking up to this man. Right? And he's a man of a certain age who grew up around certain other white people who were even older than him. And I'm sure he heard his father, who was a coaching legend, high school legend in the state of Ohio, say some of these same things. And I'm sure he coached around a lot of other guys, almost all of them white, right? Most of the coaches he's coached around have been white guys. Say these things, and even probably some of the black coaches, especially years ago, let some of these things slide because they didn't want to, quote unquote, make waves or cause a stink or whatever, right? And what he didn't realize is that the world is changing. We often complain, especially people of a certain age, about the world changing. But there's good things that happen when the world changes. And so now this would have been a don't do it again, slap on the wrist 20 or even 10 years ago. It is a sign of progress that it was made clear that he could not continue to lead this team anymore. A team that is almost 7 out of 10 of the players in that locker room were black. So it is and one of them is openly gay, right? A lot of the things he said, they were extremely homophobic, and the first active openly gay player in the NFL, right, is on his team. So I am pleased, though it is the classic. Somebody was quoting El Haj Malik Al Shabazz, and it is the sticking a knife in your back 12 inches and pulling it out, 3 inches and pulling out another 3 inches and calling it progress. But I'm going to call it progress, right? The knife is still hanging out of our backs another 6 inches or so, but I'm going to call it progress because at least it's not in there all 12 inches. Those are my final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for coming on, and I'll see you Thursday.
Yes, sir.
All right. You have a good night.
You too.
Mr. Scott, I'm going to give you the final thought tonight. Glad that you were able to come on and talk with us. Next month, I'm going to talk with Don because I'm going to target black conservatives. So
you might want to have me on that.
Well, hey,
have a few darts for them.
You're welcome anytime. But my subject next month will be black conservatives. Are they the porters on the train to racial inequality?
Thanks for having me.
So give us your final thoughts, Mr. Scott. Where do you think the black church is heading? And we will be continuing this conversation next week. So
good. Well, thanks for having me. And I think when I think of the black churches, I also think when I used to travel as a kid to Chicago and Detroit, and I would see the Muslims, selling their paper, and I would see them selling their bean pies and whiting, and that's a religion. That's a religion also that they believe in, and that. So I think the religious thing, especially in the black community, there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of things that really need to be talked about. I think my overall feeling about religion in the black church is that it is something that has potential to keep us together. That I think that if we draw on this spiritual piece, as my grandmother used to say, this is somebody that never had a chance to go to school. Her school burned down in Talladega. But she said, we made a way when there wasn't no way. And she would try to read the Bible to me, talking about thee said. I said, no, Grandma, it says the. It's not thee. It's, and she's trying to help me. And so I think that spirit of us trying to help the next generation, I think can be driven a lot in part by the church, because this is something we do on our own. During the week, as a kid, I go to school, but on the weekends, I was in with our people, with us. So we had a chance to do the things and talk about the things we wanted to do and be with each other. So I think that's the most important part. So I look forward to further conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Scott. Enjoyed having you, and I look forward to having you back anytime. I'll make sure I send you a link. So I see you representing your twin cities there. So I'm going to assume that.
I saw your Steelers got through. I'm not sure about your quarterback if he's going to make it through, but boy, you just can't count them out. But I will say that if Tomlin has a losing season, they will fire him. That's what they do to brothers.
I asked that question.
That's what they do to brothers.
I asked that question on my sports show, and I want to say, because I don't think that we're going to win more than 5 games this year. And I want to,
really?
Yeah, at the most.
Wow. Is your schedule that tough?
No, our team, Big Ben is that bad, but that's another conversation.
Yeah.
I would hope that Mike Tomlin does not be the casualty of big
I
biz.
tell you, they don't allow brothers to have a losing thing. That's what they said. They with Denny got the playoffs every year. Then went 5-11, got rid of it.
But he wasn't playing. But it wasn't Pittsburgh. The Rudy family is a little different. But we shall see.
We'll see.
We shall see.
We'll
Thank you so
see.
much, Mr. Scott.
All
And
right, James. Always good to talk to you. All right, man.
I'll see you Saturday.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. You have a good night. Uh, Brother Williams, as always, very good having you on the show. I was hoping that we would have another. I ran across a young lady in one of our shows in Minneapolis named Miss Lynn. What's her last name here? And she is a member of the new Black Panther Party in Minneapolis.
Oh, that would have been
Miss Lynn Crockett. I was
that would have
hoping.
been great to have her on.
Yeah, I wanted to get her on. As she said she was ill tonight, but I wanted to get her on. And in the meantime, I want to go over a couple of things that we talked about in the previous segment with some of the other people. Um, One of the things that I didn't have a lot of kickback on, but um, it's something, and once again, I kind of have to remind people of the fact that I am a preacher's kid, so it's not like I'm ignorant about religion, the Bible, and things of that nature. But when talking about the Bible, to me, it's a book written by man.
Mhm.
So therefore, I read it as such. I don't read it as the gospel, but it's a self-help guideline.
But it's called the gospel.
Well, that well, that also goes as I said before. I am a spiritual person. I am not a religious person. I found spirituality. I reject religion. So maybe that makes me a little, different. Maybe it makes me a somewhat of a dichotomy. But I found spirituality under fire as a young man. I mean, I was actually under gunfire. My life on the line. I found spirituality. I found a higher being.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I have to call him God or Jehovah or anything else. I can call him if that's if that's my spiritual meaning. I don't have to use your terminology. I mean, we might not even speak the same language.
Right.
But being a spiritual person does not mean that you have to be a religious person. And reading the Bible does not mean that you have to take it literally, but you can still use it and apply it to your life.
Right. Definitely. Well, I would say this.
How,
Just
how, how do the Panthers incorporate that into their philosophy?
Well, I want to say we don't incorporate any specific religion into our philosophy because our philosophy is based around the fact that oppression is administered to us as black people because we're black, because we came from the continent of Africa, and our legacy is built around fighting oppression as it applies to racism. Now, and from that standpoint, if you just go back into modern slavery, what you look at is you look at a situation to where religion has been used to justify slavery. And so from that standpoint, it to us it serves as a divisive tool as it applies to fighting oppression. We recognize that religion, just like anything else, can be weaponized, and we see historically where religion, specifically from the mainstream religions, Islam and Christianity, have been used to enslave African people here and on the continent of Africa in the diaspora. So as it applies to those two specific religions, we recognize that. And so we teach the historical significance of knowing how religion can be used as a divisive tool. And now as it applies to anybody's specific practice, we don't condone or condemn anybody for their religious beliefs, but we ask people to recognize the fact that uh, when we want to address things at a level of fighting oppression the way we do, then religion does not play a role in that. And so we recognize and we accept people's perspective. But one of the things you find, the more you study and grow within the Panther Party, based on studying history, the more you tend to have live into conflict through the contradictions that you find within the historical, should I say, the non-historical texts that you find within biblical philosophies, and so we see that. But one of the things I would like to say, just in regards to that, is that because religion is so divisive, and because religion, especially as it applies to us as Black people, has been used to create a codependency upon the slave master, we have to get our membership to at least recognize that, at least recognize the fact that as Christianity specifically, let me talk about that, has been taught to us. It has been taught to us from a position of creating an inferiority complex. It has been taught to us from the position of looking upon the European as the closest and the holiest and to God, and that your enslavement was justified. Now, obviously, modern day versions of Christianity try to suppress and shun that perspective. But in the same token, I would say 95% of the churches that you see, you're going to see the painting of Michael that Michelangelo did of this white man with a beard, that and that being the quote unquote image of Jesus. And if you were to challenge that, and this is just talking to black people in regards to the church. If I were to just go to a black church and take down that white Jesus and put up a black Jesus, that'll cause a whole lot of confrontation just in doing that. We've been so ingrained in like I said, the warfare aspect of how religion has played a role in our dichotomy, that most people or feel like they should accept that image and everything that goes along with that image, and then talk around it, but not realizing the psychological damage that that does to you, and prevents you from ever looking at yourself as being able to come up out of the condition of being domesticated and operating through a codependent lifestyle. And so that would be the biggest problem I have with it, is that if you're going to quote unquote recognize the how this was weaponized and used against us, then tell the truth. But then when you start talking about the truth, now you got to start peeling back layers of the truth. And then you get into a whole complex concept of, well, how far back do you want me to go with the truth? Because, that's where the problem lies right there. Because if you really want to deal with it from that level, then and you start peeling back the onion layers, now you get into a sticky situation, and recognizing how religion is basically used to help control the masses of people. Now we're moving beyond just black and white at this point. Then you get in a situation where it is in favor of governments to utilize religion to keep the people in their place. And so I don't see that, not just the United States, but I don't see this world willing to move away from the fact that a lot of this stuff is based on, is based on mythology, and that mythology it just goes back beyond anybody's real ability to uh, state the source. I mean, let's just look at some of the aspects, and then I'll let you speak on something else. We can go back and we talk about how, like, the Dogons in Africa were able to tell you about star systems without the use of telescopes. We can go back and talk about ancient Sumeria, uh, to where you had the same stories of the flood that looks completely identical to the flood, the story of Noah, and as well as of Enki. And you can go back to looking into different religious documents, and you've seen 16 crucifix that match identically to exactly what happened to quote unquote Jesus Christ. Whether you talk about ancient Kemet and other religions and other background stories. So what you find is, if you start peeling back the layers, you find that basically what you're dealing with is the story has been told and retold through, different cultures over over thousands of years that predate the Christian Bible and the and the Quran. But again, it goes into how far back you want to peel this onion, and I don't think the world is ready to accept the fact that religion is not what it's been portrayed to be. And at this point, like with my experiences growing up in the Bible Belt, people have lived their life so much so ingrained in the way religion is utilized to create morality within this quote unquote system of separation of church and state, that to not have a religious I would say a religious code that keeps you in check, in addition to the law of the land, is just something that most people just can't fathom.
You know, to me, all you have to do is go back and read the history of the Crusades. But I guess that's a little
Yeah.
too. I guess that's a little too simple, or maybe a little too logical.
But that's
But
that's history. That's history, and that history is not taught in school. So now you're talking about someone going on a quest of self knowledge, of identifying true historical significance versus things that they are taught, growing up as a child in school and church, because the two coincide with one another in the way we've been taught throughout our life.
I've also been taught that the church is charitable,
Hmm.
and my sister, God bless her, and she lives in Cleveland. She goes to one of those mega churches, and she ties a certain amount of money to the church every year. And I found two things that were really remarkable about that, uh, because I had never known for a church that if you don't meet your tithes, they send you a letter and say, Miss Mitchell, you are such and such behind in your tithes. And by the end of the month, my sister, in order to meet her obligation, is more or less living off the rest of the family as far as food stamps or whatever. Where this minister is driving a brand new car, living in a house. I don't know how many square feet it is, but uh, it's more important that we support the church rather than support the community.
Well, I would say that goes right into the aspects of the contradiction of the message that's even within the Bible, because from that standpoint, the Jesus Christ that's in the Bible did not operate off of the tides. It had to do with the land of the law of the land. And that's where it started getting convoluted, because you keep in mind that Jesus went against the church, and then he went against the Roman Empire in the story, in the book itself. But the thing about it is, now again, we talk about this whole mythology, or myth that has to do with separation of church and state. The church itself is a non-profit that operates through that's sanctioned through the government, and so therefore it operates off a tied aspect. And so the membership are taught that their taxes to the church are just as must be paid the same as our taxes are to our government. So that separation of church and state goes into the same philosophy, and that has to do with paying your taxes. Basically, the church itself, which is an institution, must be upheld. And in order for you to meet your moral conduct and character, it had to be written within the operation of the church that if you are not paying your tithes, then you are cheating God, which don't make any sense in any utmost logical aspect, but it makes all the sense in the world as it applies to maintaining the foundation of the religious body that in which the institution must thrive and support and live off of. And so keep in mind, it is to the benefit again of of controlling the masses that that institution is uplifted, that institution is kept in balance, in check, right along with the law of the land. The two come together. So we teach, and it's been created as such to teach the children to gain a morality through church and gain a morality through the school system. Both are given to you, at the same time. Typically, in the Christian household, you baptize your child within the religion. You circumcise your child within religion, and then you basically dedicate your child to that religion. And in doing so, now all of a sudden, what you've done is you basically given them an indoctrination that they must live by, that is being handed down from generation to generation to generation. So the peer pressure starts, from day one of our birth as to exist along with this. And even typically when we decide that we don't want to participate in it, or we find flaws in it, it is after we have to leave out of our parents' household, because as long as you're under that roof, then you're going to do what? Go to church. You're going to worship the way the household worships, and you're going to do exactly as you're told. To do otherwise is, you know, saying that you got Satan in you, or in casting you to shame, and casting you to evil, and the whole witch hunt aspect. And so we got a lot that's working against us in terms of just the psychological aspects of liberation, that plays into just how religion is taught to you. And religion is taught to us from this position, and I'm talking generally speaking in regards to Christianity. It's taught that for you to fear God. It's taught for you to have this position to where everything you do, has to be based upon that religious belief, that any other way is the wrong way, and any other way, going back to when you say spiritual, when you say that to to the average real good Bible thumping Christian, then you're a pagan. Anything other than that, if you're not accepting Jesus Christ as your savior and the way to God, then you are basically worshiping Satan. Anything outside of that is Satan. So now we talk about that whole polarity dynamic that is again used to indoctrinate and used to control the masses of the people. It's either you this or you that, and then the church will go on to say you cannot serve two masters. So either you're serving Jesus Christ or you're serving the devil. Period. Point blank. Anything outside of generally speaking, that white image that comes into your mind that represents this Jesus, anything outside of that is Satan in disguise. And so it's well indoctrinated in us that Satan takes on any and every shape and form outside of that white image that you see. And
Well,
so it's a tough battle.
Well, you see, I don't have that problem because I think of myself as a boatman on the river Styx, and I think I'm going to see a whole lot of people that don't think that they're going to be there. Uh, so I'm gonna, I'm gonna get my heaven from seeing, the agony on their faces when they find out, that hey, this is where you really are going, and this is where you belong for spreading that BS. But anyway, like I said, I have no aspirations of that pie in the sky. I feel that I'm a man. I wake up every morning. I do the best I can, and hopefully I'll earn my reward, whatever that is and wherever it is. And I'm content with that.
But you're speaking from a liberated mind. See, a liberated mind recognizes the fact that um, we all must, and we have to share a common bond throughout humanity, and there is no true separation from God and God's creation. But at the same token, again, the indoctrination and the control comes in when you have to basically bring God down to the level of the man. And when we do that, and when we allow ourselves to accept that, now in terms of turn up that level of control, I got to give you a specific image. And then once I get you to buy into that specific image, then I get you to buy into that likeness. And anything outside of that likeness is automatically going to be deemed inferior. And so this is why different lands have different religions, and those different religions speak to that culture of that people. It is only African Americans, for the predominantly, let me just say this, it's only the places that have been conquered by Europeans or the Arabs that are operating, the conquered people are operating from a religion that is outside of their likeness. And so that's getting down to the root element of the problem. If your religion is based upon you being conquered, then who religion is it really? And that's how you have to look at that. You have to look at that going back to the historical significance of warfare. You got to look at it as to recognizing that the soldier and the soldier, the pilgrim, and the what do you call it? The missionary all came together and operated one by one, putting in sync in terms of control and in terms of domination. And then going back to what you talk about with the Knights Templar, then you really getting into it. And that a lot of people don't want to go back and touch that part of Christianity because that part of Christianity is bloody. That part of Christianity is way different than what you see today. And so it's even and even looking at the mass when people quote unquote drink the blood of Jesus and taste his bread or body, for instance, they don't recognize that these are even quote unquote pagan rituals that go back to the blood sacrifices that existed and was referred to as the Old Testament and predate that even. So you have to be open to the fact that you have to look at the historical aspects of really what went on. And I say again, in doing so, when you look at the parallels between the stories of the Bible with stories of of other religious documents that predate the Bible by thousands of years, then it draws the big question as to what is it that I'm really following. Because I would say the essence of most religions are righteous, but that righteousness comes at a cost of what? Your cultural identity. And you have to be able to look and see yourself and your intact culture, not just any culture, because everybody's culture is in their religion, but is it the culture of those that controlled you and those that enslaved you, or is it your culture that was intact that empowered you as a people, empowered you through your land, through your native land? And 9 times out of 10, as it applies to the African American, that was not the case. Now, to get around that, we develop offshoots, like for instance, the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam use Islam as a foundational base, but then they go into cleaning up the individual and raising the individual's consciousness and raising the individual's character and rebuilding the African. And so uh when you use religion to do things like that, then you can still end up with a very powerful person and a very powerful people. But the problem is, again, religion in itself continues to be used as a means of control. And so as a people, we once we recognize this, once we recognize that it is always the one that does that did the conquering, that defined who you are, that controls that religious front, then we have to take a step back and recognize it to be what it is, and just a tool of war and a tool of control and a tool of manipulation. And and from that, only when we recognize that can we really achieve our liberation as it applies to that spirituality.
You know, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the show was how dependent uh, our grandmothers and grandfathers were on the religious aspect. I spoke of Sunday morning. While my grandmother's making my grandfather's biscuits by hand. She's listening to the staple singers, or she's listening to some type of gospel every Sunday morning. She might not be attending that building, but the neighborhood and mostly the focus of the black community dealt around the black church.
Mhm.
Uh, when I look at the faces of the black church today, and I'm not saying anything different. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, a bunch of these old cronies that like I said, I remember when Al Sharpton was fat. So but my point being, have have we become so um, how do I want to put it, enamored with wanting to belong to something that we don't investigate enough. In other words, we have a lot of um, ministers or leaders of the church that I believe uh, look upon their flocks not as something to be protected and cherished, but more as something to shear, a profit mechanism.
Well, let me say this.
Am I being pessimistic again here?
No, but what you're dealing with is a hierarchy. And let's go back again and talk about this and break this down from a warfare perspective. Remember, the only institution that African Americans were allowed to maintain that did not get constantly destroyed every time it was built up was the black church. Remember that is the only institution throughout the history of slavery and our overcoming physical slavery that was allowed to be maintained. When we tried to develop our economic institution, when we tried to develop our educational institution as Africans, these institutions were and continue to be destroyed. The only one that is allowed to operate without being constantly destroyed is the religious institution. And so, therefore, if you want to find ways to route politics or route economics or route power through the black community, then you operate it through the institution that is allowed to stay erect, that being the church. So there lies how the hierarchy comes into play. So what we're looking at this point is we're looking at people that recognize that if I want to operate from a certain level of control and have a shield or a protection upon how I administer whatever it is I want to do, then I have to throw that religious shield, or I have to operate it through that religious institution. This is why people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so powerful in what he did, because he operated through a religious institution. This is even how Malcolm X was as powerful as he was. But when you take the religious institution away from the individual, or when that person starts to try to move away from it, as Malcolm did, which is how he moved away from the Nation of Islam and started recognizing it from a humanitarian perspective, even though he was still hanging on to Muslim, the Islam. What he was recognizing was that he was going back to making this a global fight, going back to dealing with this as a humanitarian problem. So it became larger than that institution. So by becoming larger than that institution, he had to be destroyed. Because again, the only institution that we have been allowed to keep erect is a religious institution, because a religious institution suppresses our ceiling, suppresses our ability to take things to the highest level. Because through the current religious institution, you're not going to have bloodshed. You're not going to look at warfare to that level. You're going to also have the hierarchy to where you have, the pastor that's over a congregation. So now you still operate from that the head and body scenario, which again goes right back into part of the dynamic that goes into keeping a people suppressed, because the people look for guidance for that individual. And see, this even goes into the fact that when you talk about black leadership, the first thing comes to mind is a religious institution. Because when our black leadership tried to step outside of that religious institution, all of a sudden now we're radical. All of a sudden now you start dealing with the black identity extremism. Why? Because if we want to define our black identity as the source of our pride and our greatness and work from that perspective, you become a terrorist. You see, you don't have that shield protecting you anymore. So yes, the religious institution is continually being used to suppress our ability to have a liberated mind. And that's just the way it is designed. And, even from the standpoint of when you try to deal with Black liberation theology, that is the closest is the closest you can come to that. But you still are operating to a certain plateau of being able to express I would say your liberation, or express your heritage, still through a religious Jesus type of concept that holds you accountable and prevents you from being like a Nat Turner. They don't want that.
I, I understand that they don't want that. And I also understand that from a militaristic point of view, we're not in that particular realm. Uh, we can't we can't win a protracted revolution
Mhm.
through bloodshed. Now we can do it with a combination of both, but once again, it becomes to me a matter of how far you're willing to stand for your convictions.
Yeah.
Now, it's one thing if you get to that status or that realm where you are considered a threat by the uh, political system. But what I fear most is the enviousness of my own people when you decide that you want to become a leader, or that you become a leader through your deeds or perception. And I just like, when you look at history and what has happened to our black leaders that choose to not follow the path of the black church, or the path of uh, 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 I guess, for want of a better word, nonviolence. Uh, are, are we fooling ourselves? I mean, can we just keep singing sad songs and hoping that things will get better? I mean,
Well,
I look at what's happened since the three strike law, for instance.
mhm.
That just one. The other would be the Equal Opportunity Act, and as you look, all of these things are rapidly being taken away from us, and it seems like it's like um, that slave mentality. Oh, what a morning! Things will get better as the day progresses. Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like me that I've already put in my 9 to 5.
Well, I would say this, uh, and again, it still goes back to the fact that when you talk about the church and when you talk about especially the mainstream religions, they push the concept that our righteousness and should I say our peace comes in the afterlife. They preach and they institute you in the premise that Satan controls this world. So then, from that standpoint, trying to fight against Satan as a human is a losing battle. You cannot win against the quote unquote master of the physical realm. And so, therefore, the shift gets placed upon your afterlife. So, anything that you do to try to make life better here is not built upon the premise of it being able to be better or being able to be completely corrected because you're operating from a Satan's realm. You're operating from a position to where Satan has control and dominance over this land, over this entire planet. And so when the premise of your foundation, your religious foundation, is that everything you do physically will be in vain if it's not built around simply saving, quote unquote, saving souls. Because keep in mind, a religious perspective is save your soul, not save your mental, not save your physical, save your soul. And so, therefore, when we talk about fighting a physical fight against oppression, you are to a strongly religious person, you are fighting a losing battle. You are wasting your time. Your efforts should be spent on your salvation, which is the afterlife. You see, so it's built within the way the religious doctrine is taught to prevent you from recognizing those aspects that will help you to actually have a foundation that will fight oppression from the perspective of being a liberated person. And so that's what I'm talking about. When we talk about the fact that this is how we're brought up, and subconsciously all of this is what's taking place. By the time we become an adult, we are so far gone in terms of our ability to be able to free ourselves from that indoctrination that most of us will just accept it and continue to accept it, and we continue to defy critical analysis and critical thinking. Because as the more you accept something that is a contradiction, your mind has to justify these contradictions. So then you begin to live a life that forces you to see, you know, to see things that ain't true, and to see things that are fictitious, and to make them your principal perspective on how you view the world. So right then and there, if you're going to live within this lie, and you're going to live within this confinement, and you're going to live within this specific ceiling, then there's only so far you can go to contradict that, when everything that you've been taught throughout your life and your connection to
I think you froze for a minute there, Brother Williams.
so basically, when everything that you've been taught is built around that confinement, built around the fact that, the premise of you living a specific way that is based upon Satan ruling this world, and knowing that your only true salvation, your only true concept of peace will be the hereafter, then you're fighting against a level of belief that is in complete contradiction to critical thinking and critical analysis. And so the two battle each other. And so just think about it from the standpoint of logic and emotion, and think about it from the standpoint of just being a critical thinker. If I recognize that I can't walk on water, right? But yet I'm taught that Jesus walked on water. I'm taught that Jesus parted the sea. I'm taught that, well, or that Moses, I'm taught that basically these specific miracles took place. And I'm forced to believe this. And I'm forced to believe that all of these things happen. And so, therefore, my life must be served toward a spiritual or a soul salvation, not going up against the Roman Empire, the modern day Roman Empire, not going up against challenging your mental capacity. Because keep in mind, certain types of intuition and abilities from a mental standpoint was deemed as witchcraft. So now you're looking at high end mental capacities as witchcraft, and now you're looking at certain physical's ability as live by the sword, die by the sword. So the only thing you're left with again is that religious institution that will basically subjugate you to focusing on the hereafter. And this is how most of us live. This is the foundation upon which we want to operate from. So if that's our foundation, then it leaves very little room for you to break outside of that bubble and really fight your oppression from a physical level, without just eventually giving in and saying at the end of the day, Satan rules, this is how it's going to be, so I only can spend so much time trying to fight against Satan on Satan's territory, on his turf, and through his means.
It, that sounds very good, but it doesn't sound very logical.
It's not
Uh,
logical.
uh, when I was in the service, I was taught a very specific sort of skills. When I came home and could not get a job, I decided that I could use these same skills uh, because there were a couple of things that I needed to do. I needed to eat, I needed to take care of my family, and uh, I had to use my skills in order for me to. I, I didn't survive. I lived good. I'm not gonna lie. I lived good. Okay. Um, It did not make sense to me when I looked at all these small businesses around my community and the people. There was one place where everybody took their money, and that was the bank.
Mm-hmm.
So it made no sense to me to go and rob the corner gas station or the corner store when every night they got stacks of money for me in this specific building.
Mm-hmm.
All I have to do is figure out how to obtain it and get away with it without harming anyone. And I had no problem with that because, like I said, these are the skills that I was taught. I was always taught to use them to the best of my ability. And like I said, I attacked financial institutions because that's where the money was at. It made no sense for me to me to do 10 years for robbing the corner gas station when I could do 5 years for robbing the National Bank. It didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I mean, when you speak of survival as a nation, that means that we have to use the skills that we have acquired. And most of those skills are not skills that are conducive to that pie in the sky type of aspiration because we have to live now. I mean, I I don't want to survive until I die. I want to live until I die. Maybe maybe some people don't know the difference, but I think I do, and I feel much more satisfied as an individual and as a person when I'm thriving and not surviving.
Well, I would say though that just even that specific argument does not contradict living under the suppression of religion, because when those people that do well will thank God and thank Jesus, or Allah for their blessings, for the physical blessings. So keep in mind, regardless of your economic status, regardless of how you look at the money that you've acquired, you still count your blessings. So
Yes,
that's the thing about religion, is that it can fit into that category still, and by quote unquote you doing some good with your wealth, now you're doing God's work. And then the church is going to come at you by paying your tithes so that you can help the church grow, which helps the church reach more people, which helps save more souls. So from that standpoint, that doesn't do anything to change the narrative. But let's go back to this one thing about when I talked about the institution itself that was able to survive. If you take the wealth that goes through the black church every week, you're talking about enough power that is greater than a lot of the African nations. So we literally got at our disposal enough economic power to be a nation, enough economic power to solve poverty, enough economic power to cripple levels of oppression that happen against us. It is just that the operation of the church itself is subjugated to this specific level of being able to operate as a result of maintaining a certain morale and a certain order within the hierarchy itself. So therefore, the church is not allowed to operate at that level, because if they do, then that church will get destroyed. And you would have pastors and you would have leaders that basically get stripped from their positions of power. And so within the ranks of this hierarchy is safe havens and holds built to where they have to operate within a certain parameter in terms of what they actually do with their church and how they operate their church to a degree. Otherwise, what you start having is you start having a separation of the denominations and a separation of the power that can flow through a specific church based upon the message that they're teaching their congregation. And so again, it gets sticky. So the whole religious backing in itself, I would just say this from the perspective of a Panther, it is very good that we utilize our people that are operating within any religious uh, institution from the standpoint if they're willing to do more work within the community. But we have to recognize that ultimately religion is used against us uh, from as far as achieving our liberation as a people. So that it only can take you so far, and it's meant to only take you so far. Otherwise, that institution itself would have been destroyed right along with any other institution that we were allowed to that we attempted to build. And so that's how you have to recognize. You have to recognize that it is meant as a tool of suppression, and it is operated as such. All of the right parameters are built within that institution to keep that institution on a specific path that keeps us from being individual mavericks like yourself was, and breaking away from even the independent message that's taught within the Bible itself in terms of the revolutionary aspects that Jesus quote unquote operated from. And I think that's the funniest of all of this, and the irony of all of this is that in essence, if they follow the path that quote unquote Jesus took, it actually goes against the empire and the institution of the church. But yet the church suppresses the the model of Jesus, but it upholds that image of Jesus. And upholding the image of Jesus continues to fulfill the legacy of us being subjugated as a people, because now you're dealing with a certain type of inferiority. And then that goes right back into the dynamic of playing against your critical thinking, which creates a never ending conflict in terms of looking at something one way and then trying to be logical and looking at it another way. It also creates that never ending dynamic of which one do I want to believe? His history or the inspiration of man, something being inspired by God. So I want to deal with something. I want to deal with the inspiration, or do I want to deal with the factual historical significance? And so when you go throughout your life looking at things from that perspective, then you will live in a contradictive perspective and lifestyle. And that will keep you in line as a person to some degree, and prevent you from reaching your full potential to where you can be a liberator of your people.
Been around the world twice, probably about 40 states, 7 countries. Never in 74 years have I woke up and found manna in my backyard or on my porch. I mean, if I didn't go out there and get it, it it wasn't coming. And I wasn't. Well, anyway, let's not get into to me and how I am about religion. But as always, brother, it's good talking to you. I know you have a big event coming up this week. Unfortunately, I have a commitment already in LA this weekend. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the event and what it means to the current Black Party membership?
Well, let me first start off by saying this Thursday, and we posted it on our Facebook and our social media, that we're going to have an open political class, uh, basically getting into the Black Panther Party through the current generation. What does it mean to the current generation of people? And if things go the way I want that I'm projecting, we may even have a few representatives from other formations other than just San Diego on the call as well. And so I'm inviting the public to take part in that and just hear and participate in that event, which is going to be a Zoom conference, but we're going to be doing that this Thursday at 7 p.m. specific, and you can go to our Facebook page, Black Panther Party San Diego, and get that information. And then this Saturday, from 12 to 4 p.m., we're going to be at the MLK Park in San Diego at 6401 Skyline Drive, building with the community. And we're going to have different representatives of other grassroots organizations out giving you information about who they are and collectively coming together and just talking about getting involved and moving forward and being a part of progressive movements that are fighting oppression. And so we urge the community to come out. If you want to be involved and you want to know more about the San Diego Black Panther Party, as well as a few other organizations that are moving and shaking and making headway and fighting corruption, fighting oppression in the community, come out and check us out on Saturday at the MLK Park from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Again, that address is 6401 Skyline Drive. So those are the two
Um,
things that we got going on.
Brother Williams, and is there any updates on the what's going on with the investigation of the death of the young man that we've been talking about since Thanksgiving?
No, sir. I've not dealt with that at all.
It's very amazing, But yeah, why don't you give us your final thoughts for the evening? And as always, appreciate you very much, brother, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Well, I do want to say this that there's an organization that will be there called a Racial Justice Coalition, and they deal with fighting against a lot of the incidents that's like just like the one we're talking about that happened in El Cajon, and the suppression of the information and fighting to try to get these things exposed. But it takes people. It takes a lot of people to constantly stay on top of these things to make headway of them. So from that standpoint, I would advise people again to come out on Saturday from 12 to 4 and and take part. Because there's one misconception and myth that people have, and that's that going back to what we even talked about dealing with this aspect of religion, is that your quote unquote black leadership has all of the answers. It is the masses that create revolution. The leadership helps spark that revolution. But it's the involvement of the community that makes it possible for us to overcome oppression. It's not about an individual or a quote unquote pie in the sky or quote unquote person that's going to be your savior. See those dichotomies that apply to the religious significance don't apply to the physical and the mental world down here. In order for us to free ourselves, we have to free ourselves. And so again, that comes into direct contradiction to how we are taught through religious doctrine. We're taught through religious doctrine that there is an individual savior that can sacrifice himself and for all mankind. So we tend to think that same model works in the physical realm here when it applies to us fighting for our own oppression, which is why we give so much power to the preacher. We have to recognize that that model is not valid in terms of us fighting physical oppression and us fighting judicial oppression here in the United States and here in the world, period. We must come together. We must make change. The people have to stand up, period. And so those contradictions have to be brought out and those contradictions have to be addressed. So I urge the community to recognize these type of contradictions and to critically think about how you view fighting for change, how you view whether or not change should take place. What does change look like? What does freedom look like? What does liberation look like? What does power look like? And so with that, we like to say all power to the people. Come join us and be involved.
Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate your time. I'll see you next week.
Yes, sir.
And our series on the Black Church will continue. This was week 2. Weeks 3 and 4 are coming. And then in the month of November, we will address the role of the Black conservative. Thank you so much for listening. Appreciate your time. Look forward to talking to you right here next week on to an imperfect union. Have a great week. See you next Monday.